What is the difference between marriage and a wedding? So, today we are going to discuss, I told you guys, when you are a software engineer, it is not about you know a language, right. It is not about how many language you know. The number of language you know does not make you are a best software engineer or something like that. That is not how it works. But in order to be a software engineer, in order to work as a software engineer, you need to know at least one language, right. I told you throughout this course we are using two language. One is Java, right, another one is JavaScript as a node, probably through TS, right. This and this, why two different things? Because this serve a different purpose and this serve a different purpose. Okay. So, these two language, I am not saying I am going to completely teach this language, but Java is a little different and complicated language compared to JavaScript, right. And we will therefore, I am take you through Java a little bit deeper, but not much on the JavaScript or a Node.js. Okay. But once you learn the Java concept, it is kind of easy to understand the JavaScript. If you get this Java and JavaScript, when you get the Java, the best thing is and the good thing is it is a very structured language. That is why I told it is little complicated to understand it, right, because it has a concepts. Okay, it is a strongly typed language, it has concepts. Have you learned Java in university officially? You done? Okay, then it will be easy for me because you know the answers for all the questions, right. So, before we go into this one, we need to understand two different concepts. One is compiler, right, other one is interpreter, right. So, difference is this. Usually, this is not exactly, do not take as it is, but usually a machine understands, the computer understands something called a machine language, right, something called a machine language. So, machine language, if you make to think it simple, is just a 1 and zeros. Why? Electronic device always only know whether, because electronic devices triggered by the electric signals, right, the power. So, power present or power absent. Let us say we have a switch, use on or off, right. If it is on, it is 1, if it is off, it is a 0, something like that, right. So, computers always understand this 1 0 concept, right, but humans cannot write program as 1 zeros, right. So, they created a language called assembly, right. The assembly language is considered as a low level language because it is we need to refer the memory addresses, we need to know the memory addresses, we define memory addresses, this is the memory address, this is the value, right. Just Google and see a little bit of a assembly language, you will see. I also can code little bit like adding two numbers, removing two numbers kind of a thing can do, but I cannot do more than that. So, assembly is a language, right. So, then assembly required to convert to still 1 zeros and then they create assembler to do that, right. Assembly language, assembler converting into this. So, now coding in assembly language, it will again hard because referring all those low level memory addresses and everything hard. So, they create a other high level language called like a C, C++ and so and so, right. So, what this language does is we write code in English like language, right, for, else, then, I mean C does not have, but when it comes to high level language that is how you code. Now, there has to be someone to convert this high level language into the low level language, right, which is the machine code. So, they created something called compiler, right, compiler. What the compiler does is, it go through this language this English like language and convert into machine code, right. Now, advantages, it do something like else also during the process, it check the syntax validation, right, syntax check and everything it does, right. So, now compiler mean is a compiled code, which mean machine can directly understand it, right. So, since it is a compiled code, it is a very fast, why there is no other conversion happens during the process, right. So, and also this is platform dependent. Why? Because each platform handle code instruction differently, right, because platform architectures are different, right. If you get the Mac, so now Mac do not have any more Intel chips, right, it has its own M chips. And if you get the Windows, mostly run on Intel chips. If you get the ARM, it is a different architecture. Based on the architecture differences, process differences, they process instruction differently. So, this compiler need to compile into the platform which is it's running, right. So, when it is a platform dependent, what you understand? What does a platform dependent mean?
We take Windows, it will be like only Windows only.
That is OS dependent.
We take a Windows as a platform.
You cannot take Windows as a platform because it is OS. Platform is collection of software and hardware. Okay? It is not just the software. If you get the Linux, you cannot say Linux as a platform, right. If the Linux run on ARM, it is different than, because Linux can run on Raspberry. It is not as a Linux run on a 86 machine. So, because when you say platform independent, tell me this, you write a Java program, Java is a platform independent, right, we all agree. So, if you get a Java program which you run on your laptop, can you exactly port into your mobile phone and run? No, you cannot. You cannot, because it does not work like that. So, people have a really bad idea about this platform independency. It is not the OS, it is nothing to do with the OS, it is not just the hardware architecture, it is of both. So, now this is fast, this is platform dependent, right. So, there is some other thing called interpreter. What the interpreter does is, interpreter does not convert, for example, C, right. What interpreter does is, interpreter does not compile the code, right. It interpret on a runtime, it does not compile, right. In the runtime, it interprets the code. So, therefore, since it is a runtime, it is slow, right, because it is on runtime, it is slow, right. Plus it cannot check the syntaxes, right. If something is wrong, if runtime it tells this is wrong, because there is no compilation process. That is why if you write a node program, pure node program, not TypeScript, pure node program or any JavaScript, right. So, when you run only, it says your for loop is wrong, right, some variable is missing, this variable not declared you are using, something like that. Why? Because there is no compilation, it just on a runtime it figuring out what is happening, right, it is slow, right, but it can run platform independent, right, because there is no compilation. Any platform which has the interpreter can interpret the code, right. If you run a node on a Mac, the interpreter on the Mac can interpret it. So, if you run on Windows, the interpreter on the Windows can interpret it. That is a different, right. You need to understand this before we go into Java, okay, clear, right. So, now tell me, everyone has to have answer. The simple question, what is Java? What is Java? Start from there. Okay. Java is a platform independent language. Okay. 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 So, except Jamshid's answer, none of your answer is isolate the Java. He also not exactly correct. He just but put the JVM, then nothing else can come in. Okay? But keep in mind there are other languages which run on VMs, right? So when you give a, because you always need to understand, now you are not a students anymore, you are not a university students anymore, right? You are a software engineers. So when it is software engineers, you need to give engineering answers, not just a student answer, right? Students can tell anything, but when it comes to engineer, you need to give engineering answer. When you explain the Java, you need to isolate the Java. Right? He little bit put the JVM inside that, so that's why it's kind of okay. Right? So you need to tell, yeah, it's a programming language, but there are so many programming languages. It's object oriented, but there are so many object oriented programming languages. Right? So it's a high level, yeah, there are so many high level languages. Right? So Java, I'm not going to tell the history of Java or anything, right? So who created the Java? James Gosselin. Why it's named as a Java? What was the previous name? What is the previous name for the Java? See, when you learn something, learn a little bit of history of Java. Why he created the Java? What was the requirement to create the Java? Not exactly TV remote, but you are a little close. Go and study, right? Study in the sense, just it's good. Right? You are learning Java. See why it is named as a Java, who created it and why he created it, when it created it. Right? It originally under the Sun Microsystems, right? And then now with Oracle, right? So when that transition happened, what was the first version? What is the latest version? Right? And just learn those things, right? I am not going to spend time to teach history, but it's always good you learn those, right? So Java do our previous both concepts, which is compilation and interpretation. Okay? So Java, we are saying Java is a platform independent, right? So we write Java code, right? So which means .java files. When the Java C is a compiler, compile into a byte code, right? This is convert into the byte code. This is compilation. Right? But we discuss computer only can understand machine language. It does not understand the byte code. Right? It does not understand the byte code. So now what it does is we take, like, let's say for example abc.java is your file. This convert to abc.class. Right? abc.class, which is the byte code. Now what we need to do is we need someone to interpret it, right? So compilation already happened now, that is done. So now we need someone to interpret it to the machine language, there where JVM comes, right? JVM comes. Actually we are using something called just-in-time compiler, right? We can discuss this later, what is just-in-time compiler and how it different. So now what the JVM does is it run this byte code on the machine, right? So here is the interpretation part. Now Java, so now we learn while ago, when it is interpreter involved, interpreter interpret the code onto the host platform. So that means interpreter is platform dependent, right? Interpreter always platform dependent. So Java platform independent mean we write the Java compiler converts to class file, that class file will be interpreted by the interpreter. So now if you run some sort of a very advanced program on your laptop, but when you take this class file and give into mobile device to run, if the mobile device JVM don't understand whatever that you have written, the libraries or anything, the architecture is not compatible, then it won't run, right. We say write once, run anywhere, but that is, there are cases it does not exactly true. We can get it work, right, using a compatible libraries and everything and write the code in a different way or so and so, but it is not exactly true, right. For example, you are writing a code, Java code, right into a serial port or a parallel port. So, when you run this on mobile device do not have a serial port, right. Then you need to create a virtual serial port in order for this program to work. Like that, there has to be some adjustment, but technically this is how it works, right. So, you have a JVM. So, JVM interpret byte code into the machine code, right. Actually, sorry, it is not converting to byte code to machine code, it is interpreting this to the machine code, that is why it is an interpreter, right. So, now usual languages, if you get the C, it do the 1 because it is a compiling, and if you take JavaScript, Node.js we discussed, it does not do compile, it does only do the interpretation, but Java do the both, right. So, now Java came long way from 1.5, 1.6 and 1.4, 1.3 was there, 1.5, 1.6. Java 8 was a kind of a significant milestone, right. Then Java 11 came, I mean every version came, but there are certain significant milestone versions. So, Java 8 kind of introduced so many different things because world was moving with the functional programming, like especially like Python and all those languages comes, right, Scala, Go languages. So, Java also introduced the functional programming on the Java 8 and onwards, and then now Java 2021, there are so many latest version, right. These things are different, but here I am not going to talk about latest Java version or something like that. Instead of, we are going to discuss about Java concepts, right. So, these concepts little bit different sometime into the latest version. For example, if I say interface cannot have a implemented method, that is the by definition, right. By definition, interface cannot have a implemented method, but Java 8 onwards, it do support to hold the static and the default method on the interface, right. So, then we can say Java is a strongly typed language, you must have a type, but latest Java version support var, okay. So, therefore, these concepts will be a little bit different to the latest when it comes to the latest version, but you can map it, but what you need to understand is the concept. Let us see how Java runs, okay. So, now we learn, we have our abc.java file, right. Now, it is converted to abc.class file, right. How you compile? So, now you guys know Java, tell me someone command to compile this to this Java, Java C, abc.java, okay, abc.java. So, now it will end up with the Java C. How to run the how to run this abc.class file? Java abc, okay. So, now actually what is happening here? Actually what is happening here? What is really happening behind the scene? If you go to Windows machine, I am not sure this command is still working. If you type on the calc on the command line and enter, it show up the calculator. It was few years back, I do not know whether still it is there, right. If you type a notepad and enter, it pop up the notepad, right. If you type win word and enter, it come the word. MS Paint is not there in the Windows anymore, right? Is still there? Okay. So, if you type MS Paint and enter, the paint coming up. Notepad work. Okay. So, what that happen? You go to command prompt and type notepad and enter, notepad coming up. What is happening there? You need to talk, huh? Whatever you think, it's okay. There can be right or wrong answers. Huh? It's launching the application. When you give the exe file name, it launches the application. So, when you give Java, what really happens? It launches the application. In this case, this is the one who create the JVM. Can we install JVM? Huh? Can we install JVM? No, you cannot install JVM. Why? It's virtual. JVM is something being created in the process. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist, right? So when you give the notepad, it pop up the notepad. When you give the Java, it pop up the JVM. If you give the notepad and a file name, it load that file to you. That means you pass a what? Argument. You pass argument to the exe file application. So likewise, now what you do here, Java, you pass the argument which is the class file, right. So now it start to load the class file by creating the JVM, right. So now we go deep in the creating JVM part in a different video, because this go to loading, linking, initialization, preparation, so many other phases, right. So we are going to discuss that in a later video, but for now you think it load the JVM, it start the JVM Java program, and then it load your class file, right. So when you do that, what it look for a something called main, right. It required a method called main, right. So now this is a program, no? This is a program. Which language used to write this program? Huh? C. C used to write this program, right. I have a source code of this. I will show you later day, right. So you can try, like you can kind of customize this error message and recompile and see, okay, I have now my own Java version or something like that. That's fine. Okay. So you can explore, if you know C little bit, you can do it. So now when it come, I mean, there are so many processes in between, right. It load in the static methods, it load in the default methods, initializing variables, so many things happen which we are going to discuss in a later session. But right now just think, when it load, it look for a method called main, right. So it has to be a public method, we will discuss why, and it has to be a static and void. Void means it doesn't have any return type, right. It looking for a public static void main, okay. So that is the signature is looking for. What if we give like this, static public void main? Will it work or will it not work? I am asking from people who learn Java in universities. Will it work or will it not work? Huh? Who says working? It will work. Why?
Placement doesn't matter.
Which placement doesn't matter? Order of what?
Order of the keywords.
So that means, can I write like this? Void static public main. Can? Huh? Will work. So you remembered half. This won't work, right? Access modifiers and non-access modifiers, order doesn't matter. Okay? Public is the access modifier, static is a non-access modifier, access modifier, non-access modifier, order doesn't matter. But if you use like this, it won't work. Okay? So now we learn JVM. You have heard something called JRA, also JDK. Okay? You have heard something called JRA, JDK. So let me, what is a JRA? What's JRA? Yeah, don't give me the abbreviations, what it does. I thought this is JVM. What JVM does then? You only need either JVM or JRE? I thought the execution environment provided by the JVM. No? What the JVM does then? What is JRE?
Runtime environment which includes the every tools for JDK and
So that means JRE contains JDK? Shankar, what is the JDK? Okay, this is what JRE. JRE contains JDK. Okay. So what is JRE?
just
Libraries for?
for use.
Yeah, for use obviously. So then what is JVM? JVM don't have libraries? What is JRE?
Something like runtime environment which can contain the libraries to run and yeah.
Does it contain JDK also? Probably. Nice answer.
JDK has JRE. JRE has DB.
So they are wrong. The JRE doesn't have a JDK. It should be other way around. JDK has JRE. Okay. So tell me this. Okay. So you don't know that part. Ne? So now you guys need to tell me this. What is the difference between marriage and a wedding? Binding the people? You are talking about married to many people?
No, people, two-person, and wedding is like they show them to others.
Show up to others. What is the difference between marriage and the wedding? Seems like same to me. Okay, good luck. What's the difference? Okay. Marriage is a legal thing, wedding is an event. Okay, acceptable. Wedding is a ceremony like what? Starting the marriage? Okay. So, if you get the marriage in Sri Lanka, still you need the two opposite genders, right, which is age enough to marry, age limit is exceed 18 years old, two opposite genders and someone, two witnesses and someone who authorized to register the wedding. That's all you need, right. You don't need the millions of rupees to feed other people, giving a lunch or a dinner or a liquor or whatever. You don't need that. You are legally married if you have those fulfillment. Okay. There are other criteria. You need to have like a 20 plus people witness if you don't have a legal bond. There are so many other ways, but technically that is the legality of the marriage. Wedding is how we, the definitions, how we like kind of doing it, right. Some people do it that way, right, go to Kacheri and get the registration done and that's it. So that's what it is, right. So some other people, Sinhala people, what they do is they come to book a like big hotel and come to get in the poor and exchange the rings and do everything. The Muslim people, there are different cultures to do this wedding, and Christian, Catholics, they have a different. Hindus, they have a very different rituals on the wedding. Each people, each culture doing same thing differently. Okay, we have a definition of the marriage. The implementation is different. Okay, that is called specification and implementation, right? Specification and implementation. Right? Specification tells what need to be done. Implementation tells how we do it, what part and how part, right? So, the marriage says you need to 18 years old, opposite genders someone legally authorized to register this, and witnesses, right. So, now you can take this, right. It does not say where they should sit, right, the specific time of the day should do this, nothing like that. But in implementation comes, we find a nakat, the good time, right, and we find a good place, right, we invite other people, that is implementation. You can do in the way you want. That is the difference between interface specification and implementation. So, when you draw the diagram, you draw like this, right. You draw a big picture called JRE, and inside that you draw something called JVM. That is what you said, right? Or the other way around. Big picture is a JVM and small box is a JRE. Okay. You draw like this, right. So, now who provide the JVM? Huh? JDK? Where is JDK coming from? JDK is a Java development kit. JDK is a Java development kit. Do not take it here. So, go with this now. So, as per this one, who provide the JVM? JRE provide the JVM. JVM tells you what need to be done. Okay? JRE give you how we do it on the particular operating system. How we do this on a particular operating system. Now, I told you the both ways. So, now which one you think is correct? So, specification tell what need to be done and the implementation tells how we do it. And when you come to the JVM and JRE, right. So, JVM is specifies how the Java program runs, right, how the Java program runs, how the memory mapping and handling and everything works. JRE supporting that specification. Okay. So, there is no specification for JRE, right. What it does is it implement this specification. Now, we clear? Now, we clear, right. That is how, that is in between. So, that is why, so when you say JRE contains JDK, that is not true, that is wrong. JDK only you need up to the compile the program. Once you compile the program, you do not need the JDK, okay. Then you need the JRE, right. So, why JRE? Because program is compiled to the byte code. Now, byte code will interpreted by JVM. JVM has a specification how it need to be done, and JRE implemented that specification and provided that environment on the particular operating system. Okay? So, that is how it works. Clear? So, now if you get a Java program, right. So, we mainly deal with two things called interfaces and classes, right. This is pretty much standard to any programming language, right. Little bit different with Java, but I am going to explain here the basic definition, right. So, again we have that specification and implementation. Interface is the specification and class is its implementation. Okay. For example, if you take something, some sort of a object or some sort of a, let us say object, let us say there is a class, right, animal, right, sorry, let us say interface animal first, right, there is a move method. Okay. So, that means it define the specification, animals move. So, now when you implement this animal, no matter whom you implementing, it can be cow, it can be elephant, it can be crocodile, it can be snake, right. No matter who's you implementing, you need to implement this move method. But implementation of the move method depend on who you are implementing, right, because how elephant move and how snake move is different, and how fish move is different, right. So, that is why we are saying this is the specification. If there is animal, has to move, but how you move it, this is what need to be done. How you move it, it different to your implementation, right. So, if someone asks interface is what is the difference between interface and class, that is a very simple answer. Interface is a specification, class is implementation, but rather what we are hearing is a stories. Implementation only have a method signature, classes has a method body, this cannot have a variable value, that has a variable, so many things, but you are not going to the point. The point is this, that is interface and classes, right. So, and these are methods. If you get the class, we have the class method implementation, that is where we told Java, in order to run a Java program, you have to have a method called public static void main, right. So, this has something called string args, okay, string args. So, now we can write our code here. So, this, if you do not have this method, then JVM will fail to load your class. Why? Because it is looking for the main method, but from here you can invoke and any other classes, right. So, that is the basic fundamentals we know. Now, let us say something like this, right. So, we have something called employee class, right. Right. This file name is let us say class manager. We have a class called manager. File name is employee.java. This is valid or not? Class name is manager, file name is employee.java, valid or not? Valid or not, Java people? No. Jamsi? Not valid. Why? What is the rule? What has to be same? Class name and file name has to be same. Any different ideas? Any different ideas? Class name and file name has to be same when the class is a public. If the class is public, class name and file name has to be same. Is this a public class? No. So, this is okay, but if you create this as a public class, then this is wrong. Okay? That is the rule. So, we are discussing very basic things of Java, right? Very basic things of Java, right? And there is other thing you need to understand. Java has a variables, right? Java has variables. These variables has a two different types, right? Two different types. One is primitive type, another one is object type, we call as a wrapper. Okay? Primitive type and wrapper type. For example, you have int long, okay, let me write differently so that you can understand easily. So, now before we jump into this, I will tell one rule. right. There is a rules for the classes usually we follow, right. Some are not rules, so you can violate it, some are rules, right. So, rule is, I will say guideline, because this is mix of rules and practices. Classes always start with the capital letter, right. Classes start with the capital letter. Classes always need to be noun. Classes always need to be singular. But when I say always, there are cases this violate. For example, class need to be singular. But if you are creating a constant values in a class, let us say application property, you do not create a class called application property.java. You create application properties.java. That is not wrong, it makes sense. That is why I said it is a guideline, you can violate if you want. So, there are certain edge cases we violate this, but most of the times you need to go with this. So, now when you come back to data types, we have data types like this: int, double, long, string is separate, I will take it later. Right. So, I took it later because it is not considered as a primitive directly, right. So, there are few others, I took few. So, now what we have is, for int we have something called integer, double we have something called double, long we have something called long. You see the pattern, right. So, you have Boolean and you have Boolean. What is the difference? First letter capital, first letter capital mean what is this? It is a class, it is a class, okay? It is a class. So, primitive type has its own wrapper type, right. So, let us say for example, if you get the int, it is a primitive type, it is not a class. So, since it is not a class, it does not have a methods, right. So, if it is a class, it has methods. So, if you need to execute on a method on some value which is in the int variable, what you need to do? You need to convert into a, right. So, when you remember this word, right, 90% people usually explain this concept wrong, okay. If you say, if you have a int x equal 10, right, then you can write something like this: integer y equal x. You can do it, this is not wrong, right, this is not wrong. But this is int, this is integer, right. You can always assign int value into integer, when you do not have to do any casting, right. So, this concept called autoboxing, right. So, autoboxing mean, I will tell the wrong answer people give. People say autoboxing mean when you assign a primitive type to a wrapper type, you do not need the casting. That is wrong. The correct answer is, when you assign primitive value to its respective wrapper class. If you do a double here, this does not work. This does not work. This is not, there is no autoboxing here. There is no autoboxing. Understand? There is no autoboxing, right? So, the correct answer is, when you assign primitive type to its own wrapper, right. So, now we are time to time come back here, right. So, now we have a data type, primitives and wrappers. Difference is, primitives do not have a method because those are not classes. JVM can separately understand primitives, they treat primitives separately, right, and then integer separate. There is a specific data type called byte, right. is a primitive type, but JVM do not have instruction set to process the byte. Every other primitives, it has its own instruction set to process, but for the byte it does not have. Okay. So, when you get the byte, usually what is the range for the byte? Minus, what is the range for the byte? Minus 1282 plus 127. Okay. Why this side no 128? Because 0 consume one place. Okay. 0 consume one place. This is called sign byte, because it carries the signature. So, but generally speaking in programming, byte mean 2 to the power 8, which mean it can hold up to 255, 0 to 255, right. Byte mean how many bits? 8, right. How many bits? 8, 8 bits byte, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, right. So, now if you get something like this, right. So, what is the value? What is the value? What is the value of this? 10 mean? Do I need to teach you the primary binaries? What is this one? Talk. What is the value of this? 0. This? Now you know, right? So, what is this value? 10. What is the value? 2. 2 into 2? Devarat dega? 4. 4 plus 1? 5. 5 into 2? 10. 10 into 2? 20. 20 into 2? 40 plus 1? 41. 41 into 2? 82. 82 into 2? 4 plus 1 is the value, right. So, byte usually can carry up to 255, but Java byte only support up to 127. Why? Because it is a signed byte. Okay. Java is a signed byte. Why we need a variable? To hold some value, right. Let us say you guys want to go for a lunch or a dinner, right. You call to a hotel and say, okay, we need to reserve a table. What is the obvious question they ask? For how many people, right. So, that means they need a size. So, when you define a variable, variable always carrying a type as well as a size, right. Variable need to have a type, because that is why Java is strongly typed language, right. So, as I said, I am telling the basic Java concept, the latest version of Java little bit go around this, but internally its architecture is same. Okay. So, if you define a variable, you need a type and the size. So, now what happens is, when you define the type, size is attached to the type itself, right. If you have a byte, you know what is the range you can specify. If you have a integer, you know the range you can specify. If you have a long, what is the range you can specify. But you need always keep in mind, understand the basic fundamentals. Okay. So, byte mean 2 to the power 8, which mean 8 bit. Then different language use a different data type. Some language has a data type called short, which is a 2 bytes, right. Some languages use a 4 bytes integer, 8 bytes integer, like that. It different from language to language, but it does not different how it process. Okay. Why? Because end of the day it has to be a 1 and zeros, which is a machine code, right. Why then this range is matters to the compiler or the interpreter, okay, to compiler or the interpreter. So, now when you name the variables in Java, variable name always go with the simple letters, right. Let us say int age, right. But someone create this as an integer age, this is arguably wrong. When I say arguably wrong, that means it is not wrong. Someone can argue saying it is correct. If it is wrong, it is wrong. But when arguably wrong, someone can argue it is correct, because there is no without a doubt it is wrong kind of a thing. Why? Because when you say integer, right, so usually it is age. Age does not go billions typically, right. So, when you define integer, what happens is Java treat this as a class, right. So, when we in one of the next day when we learn the JVM in deep, you will understand when you load the class, it do so many processing inside that, right. There are class loaders involved, right, system class loaders and so many other class loaders involved. So, when is the integer, it going as a class which create an object. Again it depend on the number you assign, but so this is the kind of a best way to write the code, but this is arguably correct or arguably wrong, right. If someone write this. So, you can easily try this, create a variable with a primitive type, right. So, nowadays machines is really hard to figure it out, but you can try create a primitive value, right, and run a loop like a million times, assign different values to that, right, and create the same variable in primitive the wrapper type and do the same program. You will see if you check the heap and memory footprint and everything, you will see this is not much effective, but there are cases this is more effective. For example, you need to add this value to a data structure. Data structure means list or a set or a map or a something. Then you cannot add primitives to the maps. Then you need wrapper, right? Because if when you define a list something, because if you say list, so you need to define what is the type here, right. So, you cannot have a int here, right. So, then you need this one, okay. Then you need this one, but not always you need the wrapper type to define, right. So, now right. So, there is a specific data type called string, right. So, how Java treat string is different than how Java treat other data types. String do not have its own primitive type. Some people consider char is a string's primitive type, but it does not comply with other primitive wrapper behaviors, right. So, usually I personally do not consider. If you want, you learn the specification and you can consider if you want, but it is not exactly correct. There are so many things to tell that it is not, right. And there are other different data types, but you need to figure it out. All primitive data types and wrappers, right, or object data types and autoboxing, how it works, right. So, these data types have very edge cases and behave differently, right. So, probably next Tuesday we might discuss that, and So, if you have any question you can ask.